Good evening, and thank you for joining us at the Welcome to We Show. My name is Robert Levine, and I'm the editor of Trends in Global Grassroots Organizing, trends.we.net. Trends.we.net is the online magazine of We the World, founded by Rick Ulfik 25 years ago. We the World provides a vehicle for connection, interaction, and opportunity for unprecedented collaboration between people, organizations, and movements. It promotes a shift from I to we and is critical to change the way we think and interact in the world. Please go online and find out more about we at we.net. So again, thank you for joining us on today's show. We're very proud to have as our guest, Patrick Carolan. Patrick is a friend of We the World, a friend of Trends, and a friend of this show. Patrick is a Catholic activist, organizer, and writer. He served as the executive director of the Franciscan Action Network, and he founded the Global Catholic Climate Movement and Catholics Vote Common Good. And Patrick, among his many articles for Trends, is the one he wrote for the most recent issue. With the ascension of Pope Leo and the emergence once again in discussions about the Catholic social gospel, I reached out to Patrick and asked if he could write about this critical movement, which has been influential for Catholic progressives for over a century. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Robert, for having me on. It's always a joy and a pleasure to be on with you.
Thank you. So, Patrick, as I mentioned, you're the first person I thought of because I have a background in Catholic activism. Though I'm not a Catholic myself, I've worked very closely with Catholic groups, and I was taught about the social gospel doctrine, especially and liberation theology. Mm-hmm. So I was very excited to hear about the ascension of Pope Leo. Mm-hmm. So please give us your thoughts.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I would say I'm very excited also for a number of reasons. First of all, he's our first American Pope. He's the first Pope that if I meet him, I can actually speak English to, so that's good. I have met Pope Francis in the past, and let me just say, Pope Francis was a wonderful, wonderful person. Pope Francis is one of those people, you often hear that, and I've heard this said about people like Nelson Mandela, that just being in their presence, they give such an aura about him that you can feel it. And I felt that being around Pope Francis the few times that I was around him. I think, a lot of what we need to know about Pope Leo comes from the name he chose. And we could just start right there. He chose the name Pope Leo. And the last Pope Leo we had was somewhere in the late 19th century. And he wrote the encyclical, and I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, so I apologize right off the bat for it, but it was Nostris Aetate. And this was the encyclical that really talked about social justice. It was sort of the first Catholic encyclical that talked about social justice, and he talked about workers' rights. And it was where it got the Catholic Church moving toward supporting workers' rights to organize, and the whole issue of equal pay and things like that. It was just a fascinating encyclical. I think it was around 1896 that it came out. So unheard of at that time for the Catholic Church. That encyclical actually helped reframe American politics, because prior to that encyclical coming out, most Catholics were Republican. That's gone back to that today, but back then. And this encyclical really helped form a coalition between labor and the Catholic churches on workers' rights and other social justice issues. And it was that encyclical that got Catholic workers that you talked about earlier, Catholic workers movements organized and activated. And it was that encyclical that actually helped get Franklin Delano Roosevelt elected president and helped bring about the New Deal, because a lot of the New Deal was framed around what that encyclical said. So the fact that that encyclical was written, and then we have a new Pope, Pope Leo, it just really gave me hope and encouragement going forward. Something I don't get a lot of from some Catholic leaders these days.
or leaders in general, because we see
Right.
the emergence. I know there's been a lot of controversy about the current vice president,
Mhm.
and as well as, the recent conservative leader who was unfortunately assassinated. And
Mhm.
while we never condoned violence, he propagated a very conservative doctrine,
Yes. Yes.
which
And
yeah, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, and it's just the whole movement that we've sort of been shifting toward, not just in the Catholic Church, but in the Christian Church in general, sort toward Christian nationalism and Catholic nationalism, and it's something to really be wary of, for a very simple reason. It was that movement that really brought about Nazi Germany, the whole movement of Christian nationalism and Catholic nationalism. And in 2020, German Catholic Conference of Bishops issued a letter of apology for the actions of the German bishops and priests and cardinals supporting Adolf Hitler, and helping to build Nazi Germany. And a lot of them did it because they believed that, the whole idea of Christian nationalism and Hitler was going to make Christian a national religion, and this is all going to be centered around God. It took the, German bishops about 80 years to issue that letter of apology. I have written about that I hope it doesn't take the U.S. Catholic Conference of Bishops the same amount of time to issue their letter of apology for what they're doing these days.
Right, because I know I'm a historian by training, and I'm very familiar with Father Coughlin,
Yes,
who was of similar
yes.
political persuasion as the very conservative nationalist leaders we see today.
Hmm. Yeah, and he was leading the movement to support Hitler in the United States at the time. And he sort of got told to step down, step back, and but the German Catholic bishops were, they were marching arm in arm with Adolf Hitler, and there's pictures of them standing giving a Nazi salute, and they were ordering the Catholic churches to display the Nazi flag in the churches, and they were supporting things like, they were telling their priests and their people in the pews that they're not allowed to criticize Adolf Hitler, the leader. It would be a sin to criticize him. That was what some of the terminology they were using. So we've sort of come around to that in this country. So I'm happy that Pope Leo maybe can put a stop to some of that Catholic Christian nationalism that's going on here, and really bring us toward the movement of what Jesus wanted. And as you know, my spirituality is centered around Saint Francis of Assisi, and Saint Francis of Assisi was the first, not the first, but one of the first to really talk about this whole concept of oneness and the interconnectedness of all of us. And he started the whole Franciscan movement was started around that idea of the interconnectedness and the oneness of all of us.
Right, because as in my familiarity with him, his thinking even went beyond the human species. He also saw the oneness with all the animals and all of nature.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. He's sometimes he's the patron saint of ecology, but he's sometimes associated with animals, and you drive around and you go to churches and you'll see a statue of St. Francis with a bird on the shoulder. I have a good friend who's a Franciscan friar, and he told me one time that he felt his job was to go around and knock the bird off of the shoulder of St. Francis because it just gave the completely wrong image of who St. Francis was. And so, he went much deeper and much deeper in understanding. Like there's the story of him preaching the gospel to the birds. And somebody would ask him, "Why are you preaching the gospel to the birds?" And he said, "Well, God told me to preach the gospel to my brothers and sisters, and these are my brothers and sisters." And, he didn't mean that in some, hokey Dr. Doolittle talk to the animals way. He literally believed that we were all connected and we were all part of the one.
Right. And there is a tradition. I mean, I remember growing up when I did in the 60s and 70s, and I had a good fortune to hearing Daniel Berrigan, Father Berrigan speak.
Mhm.
And, because I was raised among very traditional Catholic people, a
Mhm.
lot of Italians and Irish. So when I first started to become aware, I was really taken by people like Father Berrigan and his brother, Father Philip, brother or father, I'm not sure, Philip
It was his
Berrigan,
brother. That was his brother.
brother, right,
Yeah.
brother, Philip Berrigan. And, I was like, wow, this is, their preaching is so powerful,
Yeah.
especially at that time of peace and oneness.
Hmm. And it's that whole understanding again, and we see this a lot in our work on the environmental, which you and I both have been very actively engaged in environmental work and climate work. And, there was in the 60s, there was a man, Lynn White, who was a cultural historian, wasn't an environmentalist, but he wrote that the problem with the environment and the whole, destruction of the environment is not so much that we're overusing, it's our theology and the whole theology that we're at the top of the hierarchy and that God gave us the authority to do whatever we will with the environment. And that whole, anthropomorphism, I can never pronounce that word, but that idea that, we're first and then everyone else is below us in the hierarchy, which St. Francis said, no, we're all equal. And Berrigan's same thing. Um, by the way, Philip Berrigan, just a little side note, Philip Berrigan left the priesthood, got married, and his daughter, Frida, is a very dear friend of mine, and she's followed in his footsteps, and his grandchildren are following in his footsteps. So,
That's wonderful. I wasn't aware of that.
yeah, yeah.
I think I did remember reading that he did leave the
He
priesthood,
left, yeah, yeah,
but that's exciting to know because this is
yeah.
an important tradition. When I talk to people who've come of age, especially in the last 40 years, they're really not that aware of that tradition within the Catholic Church.
Not at all. And again, we're celebrating the 10th anniversary of Laudato Si, which I considered one of the most important documents in my lifetime to be written. And it's just a wonderful document. And I remember 10 years ago when it was written, I was invited to Rome to be part of a group of people, Catholic climate activists who were brought together a week before the Laudato Si was being released, so we could meet and talk about how we can get this message out there, how we can all work together and collaborate in getting this message out there. And there was such excitement and hope when his encyclical came out, and I just wrote an article recently. It hasn't come out yet, but it should be out in the next couple of days in today's American Catholic. And I asked the question, 10 years later, did anything change? And, I have to look at it and say, not really. And I think part of the reason is that we read Laudato Si and we looked at it as, well, he's talking about this one particular thing, the climate and the environment. And what really I believe Pope Francis was telling us is that we have to reimagine our whole spiritual paradigm. We have to rethink of who we are in relationship to all of creation. And until we take that step and reimagine who we are in relationship to all of creation and how we're connected to all of creation, because this is what St. Francis taught us, we're never going to bring about the change that we so desperately need.
Right. And of course, for those people who aren't aware, um, Pope Francis came from Argentina,
Yes.
and Pope Leo, though he was born in the US, he was from
Mhm.
Chicago, as well as being
Yes.
a Cubs fan. He spent most of his adult life in Peru.
Yes. Yes. As long as he wasn't a Yankee fan. If he was a Yankee fan, I could never
No,
forgive him. You
I
know,
feel the same way. I'm a Met fan, so
I'm a Red Sox fan, so
you're from Connecticut, so that
yeah,
makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
But because in the years that I was involved with a lot of Catholic activist groups, the focus was on liberation
Yes,
theology, which
yes.
had a very strong presence in Latin America.
Yes, it had its, that's where it had its genesis in Latin America. And it came up and then it spread and and again you know, and we see a lot of the beginnings of what liberation theology was talk about in some of our theologians today, like Sister Elia Delio. And I think you're familiar with her work. She's just a brilliant Franciscan. And she writes about, again, you know, the whole idea of, first of all, our sacred stories were written at a time when we had a whole different understanding of the cosmos than we had today. And so while you know, we don't want to throw out our sacred, our spiritual stories, we have to read them with that understanding of where they came from. And we also have to think about the idea of what Teilhard de Chardin said is we either evolve or we'll be annihilated. And he wasn't talking about a physical evolution, he was talking about a spiritual evolution. And so we have to spiritually evolve and grow and come to a whole new understanding. And, you know, it's something that that I've said and written about. My dear friend Brian McLaren talks about it a lot. The whole concept of, do you think Jesus came with a building plan or an evacuation plan? Because almost all of our theology today is centered around evacuation plan. We're here to get to there. Everything we do here is important insofar, only insofar as it helps us get to there being heaven. Whereas if you actually read what Jesus talked about, everything he talked about was creating the kingdom of heaven here on earth today, now, not, you know. And so we need to, you know, move away from that theology of uh, the purpose of the incarnation was that's my dog barking in the background, so I hope he's not disturbing you. Um,
No, not at all.
okay, no, it's all right. The purpose of the incarnation was to free us from sin. When there's nothing that Jesus talked about as that being the purpose of the incarnation, and nothing in the early gospels about that. The purpose of the incarnation was about creating heaven. And, you know, the 13th century Franciscan philosopher and theologian, John Duns Scotus, one of the most brilliant people, wrote that for us to think that the incarnation was centered around us because we committed sin is just egotistical. You know, when God conceived creation, God knew the incarnation was going to happen. It had nothing to do with what we did.
Mhm. Right.
And and so, you know, you have to ask then, okay, so then what was the reason for the incarnation? And really, I believe was to create heaven here on earth. And, you know, maybe we ought to start thinking about how do we do that and doing that instead of always trying to wait to get to heaven.
Right. Because whenever I get involved in conversations, which I surprisingly do often about the existence of God, it's just the crowd that I hang around with. And I went, well, whether you believe in the existence of God or not, isn't it so important to figure out how we can live together on this planet?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, you know, I always tell people, you know, I have no idea if when I die, I'll go to heaven or hell, or if there is a heaven or hell. You know, I do believe in an afterlife, and I believe that we'll go somewhere or something will happen. Um, but I don't think I'll go to heaven because I go to church on Sunday and I pray and I hold my hands the right way. I think I'll go to heaven because I'm working and doing everything I can to create heaven here,
Mhm.
doing everything I can for the poor and the marginalized and to help make this a better world, a better earth for all of us.
Right. And even though, well, the reason why I wanted, besides loving your articles, the reason why I wanted you to write this article for Trends, which again, I recommend everyone to go look at the latest issue and to read your article, is because it had something to say to not only Catholics, but to everyone. This is a universal message.
Mhm.
Because there are social justice traditions within, well, the traditions I'm most familiar with are Judaism and Hinduism, as well as in Buddhism. It's
Mhm.
the same concepts.
It absolutely is. And if you study Islam, they have the same, same ideas, same concepts. It's an interesting story about Saint Francis. I keep going back to Saint Francis, but I can't help myself.
Yes.
Um, and there's never anything written or suggests that he ever was connected to Rumi. But if you read their poetry, they're very identical.
Mhm.
And so they're clear, and they were alive the same time frame for the most part. Francis is a little born a little before Rumi, but in the Muslim world and Sufi world and in other parts of the Muslim world, those same ideas are there, and same thoughts are there, and same belief systems are there. And so it's we're all part of the oneness. And I don't mean we as humans, I mean all of creation. And until we start to understand that and start to live like that, then we're never going to be able to create heaven here on earth.
Mhm.
And we're always
And
going to be living with war and with hunger and with, all of that. Because we always
yeah.
believe that, well, it might be hard here, but at least it'll be better there. It's an interesting thing. I always think about this and I ask people, was at a funeral recently. And, when you go to a funeral, and one thing people say all the time is, well, he's in a better place now. And I just want to ask the question: why do we have to die to get to a better place?
Yeah,
Why can't this be the better place?
you're right. Exactly.
Mhm.
And there have been many people, including St. Francis, Jesus, and so many who've the goal was to how we live together and how we live in
Yes,
this world.
yes. I mean, you can put Gandhi in there. You can put Martin Luther King Jr. in there,
Mhm.
Nelson Mandela, a whole slew of people, mystical and spiritual people, and even alive today. There are a number of people today who really understand and have a vision of how we should be living. Our friend Kurt Johnson has just come out with a book on interspirituality. It's a series of essays. I think there's about 75 people that have essays in that book. I have a couple in it. And all on all different religions, from the Dalai Lama to Sufi leaders to Muslim leaders to Christian leaders to atheists. And it's all on how we come together in sharing the oneness and in our interspirituality.
Right. And one of the things that I think anyone who knows about you and the work you've done, no, you're not just a teacher and a writer, but you've literally put your body on the line many, many times over.
I have. I've been arrested a lot. I've out marching and organizing. But in addition to that, and, not to what's the word, blow my own horn, but I will. um,
Please.
yeah, I often share with people that I have 4 children. My wife was a single mom when we got married, so I became a stepfather. And then we had a child, and then we became foster parents, and then we adopted 2 children. So I covered fatherhood every way you can. Um, you know, my wife and I took in a number of foster children over the years. I also volunteer regularly at soup kitchens, and my wife volunteers at hospice. So the two of us do stuff like that. So I believe it's about how we live our life every single day, not how
Mhm.
we live our life on Sundays at church or Friday nights at synagogue, or when it's Saturday at synagogue, I guess, and Friday night at the mosque. It's how we live every moment of our life, and are we connected in every moment of our life? How we see each other. There's an old expression about, and again, I've written about this, about trying to be in right relationship with God. And, how do we be in right relationship with God? And we think about that sometimes as if, well, in order to do that, we have to first, we have to go to church, we have to pray, we have to hold our hands a certain way, we have to follow the commandments. And then, people will say, well, first I want to get in right relationship with God. And then when I'm in right relationship with God, then I can worry about the poor and the hungry and people like that. And I say that to be in right relationship with God, we first have to be in right relationship with the rest of creation, with all of creation. And when we're in right relationship with all of creation, then we'll be in right relationship with God. And
Mm.
so we're sort of doing this backwards. We're trying to get in right relationship with God by being holy and all that, rather than being in the right relationship with creation. And that helps us, that gets us to being in the right relationship with God, because God is in everything and in everybody and everywhere.
Right. And there's something everyone can do, even if they don't, in one way or another, simply how they treat another, how they treat their
Hmm.
family, how they treat a stranger. It's,
Hmm.
it's something you can do every day. And I think at times people lose sight of that as they
Hmm.
get caught up in their everyday life, which can be quite challenging.
Hmm. It is, and nobody says it's easy, but wasn't meant to be, I guess. But just the whole idea of, and this comes from, excuse me, Saint Clare, who was a co-founder of the Franciscan Order with Saint Francis. Although we, being good Catholics, we gave all the credit to the man. Um, but Saint Clare wrote and said that, in what she described as the being a mirror of Christ. And so what she talked about was, when I see you, I should see Christ. And when you see me, you should see Christ. And if we're not seeing the Christ in each other, then we need to really take a step back and rethink and reimagine our spirituality, because we're getting it all wrong. And, however you define Christ, whatever Christ is, um, that whole concept of just seeing that oneness in each other and
Right.
understanding that oneness in each other. And then if I see Christ in you, how could I possibly want to do harm to you? How,
Mhm.
because if I'm doing harm to you, then I'm doing harm to Christ.
Right.
Um, and it's sort of that whole idea and concept. And again, it all gets back to the idea of being part of the oneness.
Right. And I guess that's the foundation, the basic foundation of what we talk about when we talk about a gospel of social justice.
Yes.
Seeing
Yes.
Christ, seeing, or if one wants to use the term, seeing God in everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Just seeing the oneness in everything and everybody, seeing God, seeing the Christ, seeing again, however you define it, but that being, that spirituality of I'm in you and you're in me and we're together.
Right.
And again, there's a concept that I mentioned, John Duns Scotus earlier, but he wrote about what he called the univocity of being, which he described as, the whole idea, the whole concept of the uniqueness of each of us and of everything coming together to form the oneness of everything.
Mhm.
And so,
Yeah.
become part of the oneness doesn't mean I give up my uniqueness. My uniqueness is still there, but it's there as part of the whole.
Mhm. Yeah, because what makes us unique is in terms of our relationship to each other.
Hmm. Hmm. And to all of creation.
Exactly. Now, I've had the good fortune of having mystical experiences where I've had a chance to personally experience that. And it's very powerful. And once you realize it, it can change your life.
It can, absolutely. I mean, it's sort of that, people often say that aha moment when,
Mhm.
oh, yes, and a lot of times it is. The thing is, though, for a lot of folks, we're all sort of waiting for the burning bush, you know, and we're waiting to see that burning bush. And the problem is that for most of us, when we see the burning bush, our first reaction is to get a fire extinguisher and put the flame out. And so, you know, the burning bushes are happening all over all the time, but we're blinded and not seeing them. And so
Yeah.
if you want to see the moment when you can feel that connection, it's there.
Right,
Just start to reimagine who you are in relation to everything.
exactly. So Patrick, we're probably gonna bring this wonderful interview to an end, but in addition to the audience being able to read your articles and trends, including the most recent issue, where
Mhm.
else are your articles published?
For the most part, these days, I'm publishing a lot in Today's American Catholic. Um, but the other thing, as I mentioned, we're getting ready to launch a Substack, which, as soon as we get it launched, I'll send the information over to you so you can share it with folks.
Please, and
Because
we will.
we're also going to be doing a podcast. There's three of us that are partnering on this, and we're going to really be doing a podcast on a regular basis, hopefully a weekly basis, maybe even more. Just really talking about what we just talked about and bringing guests in like Gilia Delio or Dan Horan or you or, Ben Bowler and people like that to really talk about this coming together, this unity of all of creation and the unity of all of Earth and how we get there. So people, our goal is to really get people talking about that
Right.
and not talking about how separate we are, but how do we come together?
Mhm. Which is about we, as,
Yes, exactly.
as in
Yeah.
we the world.
And I think probably in the next couple of weeks we'll be launching it. So I'll send you a message about that and a link to it to if you could be grateful if you would share it with folks, with your readers and your folks about it. And as I mentioned earlier, we'd love to have you to come on and talk on one of our podcasts. And
Yeah, I
uh,
would be honored. That's
yeah,
just sounds wonderful. And no, we definitely would want to share that, not
yeah,
only the readers of Trends, but with everyone who's part of the we community.
community, yes. Yeah. Yeah, because it's, we're all approaching this in a little different ways, but we're all approaching it with the same end game. Yeah,
Right.
the unity, the oneness. And
Mhm.
we all sort of have different ways of getting to it and different audiences. As I said, ours is I work a lot mostly in the Catholic community just because that's where I was raised and that's what I know. And it's good to stay home sometimes. Although I do a lot of
Mhm.
interfaith work as well.
Yeah,
But I think it's great that we all can connect with each other and talk to each other and share stories. And we would be very happy to take your stuff, trend and some of its stuff, and share it with our audiences as well.
oh, that would be fabulous, because we
Yeah,
also have, as you know, a lot of wonderful writers from
we
different
do.
perspectives.
Yeah, yes,
Well,
and we would love to, put links in our Substack and things like that, and promote your magazine when it comes out, especially if I'm writing in it. So, you know,
as we hope you will continue to do, and
I absolutely will.
yeah, as I can share with our viewers, I already asked you to write an article. Actually, you kind of volunteered to write an article for a future issue, and I'm going to hold you to that.
Yeah, what did I just tell me again what I said I would write about? So I
Oh, it's about your organization, so we can share
yes, okay.
what you're doing.
Yeah, great, absolutely. That's right, we did talk about that.
I don't forget these things.
Yeah, I do. I mentioned it, it's, I mentioned I have ADHD, which means my mind is chaos. And so
Yes,
I,
okay, which is why I keep a list of to
yes, so
do.
do I. I consider it our superpower.
Exactly. We
Mhm.
see connections everywhere.
Everywhere. Yes. So
Patrick, thank you so much. It's
thank
wonderful
you.
spending some time with you. Again,
Mhm.
Patrick Carolan, please check out his work, check him out online, look at trends. We will be sharing the other exciting work he will be doing. And please check out, again, I'm Robert Levine, editor-in-chief of Trends in Global Grassroots Organizing, trends.we.net, which is the online magazine of We the World at we.net. So thank you to our dear audience. Thank you, Patrick. And as always, thank you to Angel, um, who's our producer and who's such a vital part of We the World. Angel's behind the scenes right now, so
Yes, and thank you again for having me on. It's always a joy to be with you and Angel and the whole We team.
thank you. Okay, have a good night.
Thank you.
Okay.